Ever since RetroBlasting started, I honestly haven't found much of a reason to review the original Star Wars films. YouTube was born into a glut of movie review channels and Star Wars themed channels by the time our little puppet show arrived in 2012. And with the Star Wars saga being easily the most discussed film series of all time, what was left to say about the original Star Wars trilogy that hasn't already been said 1,000 times over? I wasn't interested in being the millionth YouTuber to regurgitate the Wikipedia page for the original film or cite some DVD edition's special features. It's a pastiche of Flash Gordon serials and Joseph Campbell's Heroes with 1,000 Faces. Yeah, we know. Nobody in Hollywood believed in Lucas's incredible vision. Yeah, we know. Audiences were blown away by the groundbreaking visual effects. Again, we know. I considered telling my personal story with Star Wars, but how many times have we seen that on YouTube? And it's always the same story. I saw Star Wars as a 5-year-old kid, and on that day, it changed my life forever. It has consumed my every waking moment for 30 years, inspired my career, and made me the person I am today. Oh, and I had all the toys. But now, I finally have something I want to say.
With you to Alderaan. There's nothing for me here now.
Look, I wasn't part of that original audience in 1977. You can't help when you were born. I was born just over a year after the release of the original film. I was wrapped up in Dukes of Hazzard when I saw Star Wars for the first time on a giant front projection TV in 1982 when my parents took me with them to visit some of their friends. It was a state-of-the-art home theater by 1982 standards. In that sense, I was lucky. Did Star Wars instantaneously erase any interest I had in the Duke boys? Yes. Did I have a lot of the toys after that? Yes, I absolutely did. Most of those toys now star in RetroBlasting's Star Wars Follies video series. Battle-damaged X-Wing, anyone? Then it was over. Sometime in 1985, we all knew it wasn't coming back. And from the outset of their attempts to keep Star Wars going in various mediums, it was immediately clear nothing would be able to equal the greatness of those 3 films. A few Hamilton collection plates trickled in through the dark times of the Star Wars drought, but in the early 1990s, the Timothy Zahn novels and the LucasArts PC games reignited the fires. Star Wars was back, but George Lucas was also about to take it away from us, and he meant it, and I believed him. The next home video release would be the last hurrah, and then God knows what would happen. I spent my high school years coveting the Star Wars Definitive Collection Laserdisc set and that Panasonic Laserdisc player I asked for that Christmas. You know the rest of the story because most of you have lived it just like I did. Special editions, 13 years in the prequel era, and now the sequels. Somewhere along the way, Star Wars was quietly retitled by the fanbase in casual conversation as A New Hope. By Lucasfilm and the media, it has since been saddled with the unwieldy Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. The film has been retitled almost as many times as it has had changes made to its visuals, editing, and soundtrack. So much baggage has been piled onto the franchise this film launched over the past 40-plus years that it obfuscates our memories of the original experience. The old adage, "you can never go home again," applies acutely and tragically to the casual Star Wars fan. It's gotten to the point where even people in my own generation can't clearly remember what the films were like when it was just the Star Wars trilogy and not the original trilogy. And yeah, while I get that these movies have always been changing, albeit in less ghastly ways since their original release, there's now such a fog over even how they were largely presented to us in the 70s and 80s that grown men in their 40s sometimes don't remember that Jabba and Boba Fett weren't actually in the first Star Wars movie.
What did you say?
Yeah, I've had those conversations with other Gen Xers. They have to be reminded like it was some strange Mandela effect, and it's weird. The backlash from this has been resounding, with countless grassroots efforts to, in some cases, preserve old home video versions, and in other cases, completely recreate the theatrical versions through simulations with digital editing sleight of hand. And all of these efforts have been limited by the best home video formats available each decade. The wheel of saving Star Wars turns inexorably, if slowly. But a while back, I got my hands on the preservation effort from Team -1 called 4K77, a fully restored theatrical print of the original 1977 cut of Star Wars. Melinda and I screened it, and within the first few minutes, I realized I had relaxed while watching Star Wars for the first time in years.
Don't everybody thank me at once.
I wasn't waiting for a change that was horrible. I wasn't watching for a seam line from an attempt to patch the original back over the special edition. I was home again. To properly explain what I mean, I need you to look at this with me from purely a filmmaking point of view. That means, as Obi-Wan said, you have to let go.
Trust me.
Let go of your preoccupations with added lore from new trilogies. Let go of your encyclopedic knowledge from licensed novels, video games, and role-playing sourcebooks. Focus on this movie in this form alone. There's a fundamental reason the special edition doesn't work, and it doesn't have anything to do with choices being silly or new scenes clashing tonally with original material, although that is certainly a problem. What it truly boils down to is that whether conscious or not, every choice made in the development of a film, from the words in the script to the final edit, is done with an understanding of the limitations of the time in which you're making the movie. As visionary as George Lucas was, he did not direct and film Star Wars in a way to prep for future technologies. And nobody would. Nobody does that. Everybody works with the technology they have available to them at the time. Yes, he kept all the original special effects elements for superior compositing decades later, and in that archival sense, he was forward-thinking. But the effects themselves and the live-action scenes around them were done with a mid-1970s sensibility. Now, at this point, I'm sure you're ready to pounce with other examples like Blade Runner: The Final Cut and Star Trek: The Motion Picture Director's Edition. Those work for a simple reason. Those were movies where the problems lay mainly with unfinished special effects, and the digital work done to them was done to fix glaring technical problems within the shots, and the effects artists working with the directors were committed to making sure the effects themselves did not go beyond the boundaries of what would have been possible in the years those films were made, given budget and time.
For Blade Runner, it was very important to me that we, through our mindset back to 1982.
The goal was to perfect certain shots, to bring them to a higher level, to clean them up and touch them up, but to do as little changing as possible.
We really, in the end, wanted to make sure that whatever new effects work ended up into this film, it would have only have been what was possible to produce in '79.
Even to the extent of getting the amount of dirt right and the amount of grain right.
Although they didn't state this specifically, you can tell these efforts saw the mistakes of the Star Wars Special Edition and learned an important lesson.
Mos Eisley was one of the scenes that actually prompted this whole adventure of redoing the movie.
The speeder was one of the biggest cringe moments for George. Every time he saw it and every time he's seen it for the last 20 years, he has just been, oh my God, I wish I'd give anything to be able to fix that.
Star Wars did have some technical issues worth fixing. No one blames Lucas for wanting to clean up the underside of the land speeder, just as we understand Ridley Scott's want to remove the cables from the spinner takeoff in Blade Runner. But Scott didn't decide to add a dinosaur into the scene either. He simply fixed what was broken. He didn't pile new effects from the 2000s into a scene filmed in the early 80s.
The essence of the storytelling had to be sacrificed for the limits of technology.
Enhancing and remastering films is a very narrow balance beam, especially sci-fi and fantasy films, where special effects age rapidly and the temptation to tinker with modern digital tools must be massive.
And we redid those with with computer graphic spaceships.
Not to get existential, but Lucas himself was a different man in 1997 than he was in 1977. His mentality and his preferences had already changed in subtle and not so subtle ways. My point being that Lucas himself couldn't go home again either. Star Wars is factually a product of 1977. The film stocks, the lenses, the shot compositions, the editing, and even the acting styles are all specific to that place and time. The special edition doesn't work because we're dealing with an entirely new effects philosophy contemporary to the late 90s. The shot compositions are done with a completely different temporal mentality with fewer technological limitations than faced in 1977, and inserted into a film that cannot change its late 70s stripes. And there's nothing wrong with being a late 70s film. Watching the 4K 77 effort from Team -1 was a sublime reversal on everything our generation has been chasing since we were kids. We fell in love with Star Wars as children because it was an instant cinema tradition in the ranks of The Wizard of Oz and It's a Wonderful Life. Like our favorite Dr. Seuss storybook, the story of Star Wars didn't change, but that didn't deter us from reading it over and over and over again. In fact, that's why we loved watching it again and again. The story was that good, and the effects didn't need fixing or enhancing, just a few cleanups here and there. In adulthood, we were sold an idea that Star Wars is only great if it's new again. Here we are aging, but we wanted Star Wars to always be young and pretty, except it isn't and fundamentally never can be. And that's okay. When I have a cold, I want to curl up in the old duck blanket that's been in my family since I was a kid. I don't see the old. I don't see the imperfections. I see and cherish what's familiar about the blanket, the tradition.
Hey, this R2 unit of yours seems a bit beat up. You want a new one? Not on your life. That little droid and I have been through a lot together.
Hey, can we watch that again?
Hey, this R2 unit of yours seems a bit beat up. You want a new one? Not on your life. That little droid and I have been through a lot together.
Now that was interesting. You can nitpick minor changes in different editions of Lord of the Rings, but nothing massive jumps out at you. And from 1977 to 1996, there was nothing massively different about Star Wars each time you watched it. What we love about Star Wars isn't going to be found in front of us. No new video game or TV show will be a substitute for what the original Star Wars achieved in our collective history. Even if you're a fan of everything that's come since, I've never heard anyone say that they were equally satisfied with everything that's followed in the wake of that first trilogy. That's because Star Wars transcended being just another story. Star Wars isn't just another movie to our generation. It's not on the VHS rack in our minds alongside Beverly Hills Cop and Predator. Star Wars is on the shelf in your mind with your grandmother's chicken soup, roasting marshmallows around the campfire, your favorite storybook from childhood, and the lullaby your mother would sing you to sleep with. Star Wars was more than a movie. As the credits rolled on Team -1's 4K 77 preservation of Star Wars, I realized I'd finally gone home again. After decades of travel, I didn't reach home by going forward and reluctantly accepting things I disliked because they had a Star Wars logo on it. Nor did I get there by standing still. I turned around and fought to acquire the experience we first had, adults and children alike. When you sit down and read your favorite childhood storybook to your own children, you don't want it to suddenly have new pages or missing pages or new illustrations. You want it to be unaffected by such trivial commercialism because the story was so wonderful and you're passing that same sense of wonder onto your own family. Now, I recognize I could be talking to parents who don't even read to their kids anymore, which is a tragic state of affairs, but I'm hoping that I'm not. And if there's a change to the recipe of your grandmother's chicken soup, you taste it immediately. You don't want that changed either. The greatest films of our time are usually afforded that luxury as well, because they have passed beyond the boundaries of product, and they have become legend. Star Wars, shockingly, has not been granted that privilege. All other works that have achieved the status of tradition are so respected. And so the fans do the best work they can to see that we can still go home again. And now that I'm home, I don't have any compulsion to watch the revised editions ever again. What's the point? Now, if you're too jaded to appreciate what I'm saying, the loss is yours and you may never find your way back. You might say you see outdated special effects, but I see a seamless experience both aesthetically and conceptually from beginning to end. When I watched the special edition, that was the first time I saw any seam lines in Star Wars. Stitches that read 1997 stabbed into the skin of a movie that read 1977. But maybe you're just that kind of guy who never found value in story traditions. Maybe you only saw flaws and you prefer the latest and greatest. I know your type. You'd rather be this guy than this guy.
Hey, this R2 unit of yours seems a bit beat up. You want a new one? Not on your life. That little droid and I have been through a lot together.